Those words landed like a slap. Not the kind that leaves a mark on your skin, just the kind that makes everything inside you freeze with humiliation. Not a raised voice, not a reason, just the sentence, delivered at 9:07 a.m. with the same tone Holden Marks might use to cancel a lunch reservation. Trenna, let's cut to the chase. You're no longer with us. I stared into the Zoom window. 3 faces. Daria from HR reading a script. Ethan, Holden's jittery assistant. And Holden himself, leaning back, polished, smiling faintly like he'd just outplayed me in a game I never agreed to. I didn't speak. My face didn't move. My name is Trenna Hawley, for the last 6 years. I was lead systems architect for Voltric Dynamics, the quiet brain behind vSphere, the company's crown jewel, a secure, $880 million communications network engineered for aerospace clients. I designed the core protocol, structured the encryption layers, and built the biometric gatekeeping module myself. I didn't ask for the spotlight. I asked for clarity, precision, results, and I delivered. Until Holden arrived. He came in 6 months ago in a custom suit and buzzwords. Scalability, lean, narrative control. He liked being the smartest voice in the room, especially when he was echoing what I'd just said. Louder and less accurately. From day one, he didn't understand what I did, but he understood power, and he didn't like that mine came in silence. In architecture, he couldn't see or claim. So he made me invisible. I was pulled from high-level meetings. Code deployments were reviewed by junior staff. Clients I'd onboarded personally stopped seeing my name on emails. Still, I said nothing. I knew how this game played out. And I'd been preparing, so now, as Daria explained the return of company property and upcoming paperwork, I just listened to the silence between their words. No warning, no thank you. No mention of the system that still bore my fingerprint at its root. Then it happened. Holden leaned slightly out of frame and whispered something to Ethan. She won't even see it coming. My eyes didn't blink. 9:07 a.m. I reached for my watch, tapped the metal edge, and whispered, barely audible even to myself. 14 minutes. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't fight back. Not out loud, because the moment he revoked my access, he triggered something far bigger than me, and it had already begun counting down. The coffee was still hot when I returned to the kitchen. I hadn't taken a single sip during the Zoom call. My hand had been wrapped around the mug for warmth, but I didn't drink, not after hearing Holden's voice. You're no longer with us. I replayed the words silently as I set the mug down on the marble counter. It was still warm enough to fog the bottom of my glasses. I let it. A part of me had expected the blow, but that didn't make it sting any less. I walked back to the living room, my bare feet brushing against the rug I'd chosen for softer mornings. It was 9:09 a.m., 2 minutes since the call, 2 minutes since silence became strategy. I powered on the second laptop, my personal one, the one never connected to Voltric's internal VPN. It took a moment to load, long enough for me to glance at the morning light pouring in through the blinds. Everything felt muted, calm, not peaceful, just compressed, like the air before a storm. As the system booted, I reached for my notebook, not the digital one, the real one, cloth-bound, graphite scribbled, pages marked with red tabs. I flipped to the one labeled T3. Test of Loyalty 3. I'd written that title 3 weeks ago, after Ethan, Holden's assistant, casually asked me for a backup credential. Just in case, he'd said. For continuity. I knew better. I gave him a perfect decoy, and I made a note of it. The laptop chimed. I opened Orion. The screen flashed blue, then black, then loaded the core dashboard. Its interface so minimal, no one without the keystring would know what they were seeing. But I did, and what I saw was confirmation. Unauthorized termination detected. Orion Protocol. Stage 1. Active. Time to system lock, 12 minutes, 4 seconds. I exhaled. Long, steady, controlled. I didn't need to initiate anything. They had done it for me. Still, I clicked into the access logs. I needed to be sure. The event that triggered Orion hadn't happened just now. At 9:07 a.m., it had started hours earlier, 2:17 a.m., to be exact. That's when someone logged into the backup server using elevated credentials. Not mine, but familiar. The username hmarks.admin.backuplink He'd accessed the redundant node using the fake key I had planted, probably thinking it gave him full access, probably testing whether he could move the core system without me. And in doing so, he lit the fuse. I clicked into the trigger record. Scanning the IP, it was an internal device, office-based. Device signature matched Holden's laptop. My mouth tightened, but I didn't smile. I clicked again, opened the confirmation audit. The system logged the following phrase when the fake key was used. Simulated admin override detected. Locking protocol will initiate upon condition match. And the condition match was this morning. Termination without 24-hour warning. No formal exit notice. Use of a key not linked to biometric clearance. 3 conditions, all fulfilled. I leaned back in the chair. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was architecture doing what it was designed to do. Quietly, efficiently, without needing permission. I took another glance at the countdown. 10 minutes, 38 seconds. I rose to my feet again and walked back to the counter. Picked up the coffee mug. It had cooled just slightly, enough to drink. One slow sip. I stood in that silence, not as someone broken or discarded, but as someone waiting for the system to do what I could never say aloud, waiting for them to realize I wasn't just a builder, I was the foundation. And when you pull the foundation out from under a tower, you don't hear the collapse right away. But it's already started. Orion hadn't been born in revenge. It was born in silence, after a betrayal that no one else remembered but me. As the countdown ticked beneath my fingers, 8 minutes, 42 seconds, I opened the source code folder. My hand didn't shake. Not this time. I navigated to the root directory labeled Orion Core v3, double-clicked, and watched the screen dissolve into black, then into code. Familiar code. Mine. I scrolled past the functional headers, past the encrypted blocks and hash references, down to the comments I had written 3 years ago, before Voltric, before Holden, before I knew how deep betrayal could cut. Created post-termination event. No public documentation, for personal security use only. I could still remember that night. Another job. Another CEO. His name was Clemens. I was lead architect on a high-risk defense encryption tool. Code so sensitive, I worked in a windowless room under 24-hour surveillance. One day, I noticed a flaw in their access protocols. I reported it privately. 2 weeks later, Clemens presented a core vulnerability fix to the board. My work, my findings. He took credit. And 3 days after that, I was gone. Just like that. No warning, no explanation, just a security escort and a final paycheck. Worse, they kept my prototype, rebranded it. By the time I found out, it was already being pitched to investors under someone else's name. I didn't fight it, but I did remember. That night, I opened a blank file and typed the first line of what would become Orion. In the years that followed, I wrote it line by line, code built to remain invisible until it wasn't. Orion wasn't meant to attack. It was meant to seal, not to harm, but to protect what I built, from them. I tapped the trackpad, zooming in on a block near the center of the script. The system was designed to activate only when 3 specific things happened. My access was revoked, a fake key was used, and someone logged in from an unauthorized device. 3 conditions. All had to be met. Anything less, and Orion would stay dormant. But Holden had made sure all 3 were fulfilled before the sun even rose. First, he had my admin account revoked without notice. Second, he, or someone under him, accessed the backup server using a non-authorized device. Third, and most importantly, they used the fake key I had deliberately planted. I opened the trigger log again and hovered over the entry from 2:17 a.m. The user tag was nearly comical. H. marks.admin.backup link, Holden Marks. Administrator access, linked to the backup server. He hadn't even bothered to mask it. That wasn't just careless, I murmured. That was arrogant. I clicked into the metadata. His device fingerprint matched his laptop at HQ, the same laptop he used during meetings to Google terms he pretended to know. He probably believed he'd just unlocked my system. What he didn't realize was that he'd pulled the pin out of his own grenade. I kept scrolling down the source code until I reached the final line, one that no one else had ever seen. It wasn't executable. It was a comment, a whisper in code. Build what they can't steal. My mother's words. She used to say them when I was little, after I cried over a stolen science fair project or a group partner who took credit for my work. I never understood the full weight of it until I sat alone with 42,000 lines of code no one else could claim. I didn't need revenge. I needed ownership. Orion was ownership, and Holden had just confirmed it still worked. I closed the file and leaned back. The countdown read 7 minutes, 2 seconds. I didn't feel rage or triumph, just alignment, for the first time in years. My system was doing exactly what I designed it to do, quietly, automatically, without mercy. I reached for the mug again, cold now, but comforting. I took a sip, opened a fresh log window, and began documenting everything: timestamps, triggers, IPs. Not because I doubted Orion, but because people like Holden always tried to rewrite the story later. Not this time. It started with a smile. 3 weeks before I was fired, Ethan, Holden's assistant, approached my desk with his usual mix of nerves and charm. He was carrying a coffee he didn't drink, and a tone he'd rehearsed. "Hey, Trenna," he said. "Quick thing. Holden was wondering if we could have a backup admin key, just in case. You know, for redundancy." I looked up from my monitor. vSphere's deployment logs were scrolling quietly in the background, stable, precise. I gave Ethan a long pause, just long enough to make him wonder if I'd question the request. But I didn't. I smiled. "Sure," I said. "I'll generate a copy." He visibly relaxed. "Thanks. I'll swing by later to grab it." I nodded, then turned back to my screen. The moment he walked away, I reached for my notebook. Page 42. Red corner tab. A heading I had written weeks earlier. T3, Loyalty Test 3. I had been waiting for this. The first 2 tests had been smaller. Unlogged approvals, quiet reassignments, email threads where my name had vanished. Things you'd miss if you weren't looking closely. But I was looking. I opened a duplicate of the system key template. It was perfect. Same format, same encryption signature, same naming convention. On the surface, it was indistinguishable from the real key, except it wasn't connected to the system, and it carried a trigger, one that would notify Orion the moment it was used. I labeled the file admin override B, just 1 letter off from the real one, then saved it to a flash drive I kept in my drawer. Later that afternoon, I handed it to Ethan. He thanked me with a little awkward laugh. "Hopefully we'll never need it, right?" I just smiled again. Right. They used it less than 24 hours later. The server logs showed a remote access request from Holden's device, routed through the backup node. The file name matched exactly. They didn't even try to hide it. And that was when the countdown began. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't raise a flag. There was nothing to fix. Instead, I returned to my notebook on the same page. Under T3, I wrote a single line. If they use this, they don't deserve the system. Then I closed the notebook, filed it beneath a folder marked Quiet Exits, and went back to work. I wasn't angry, Not then. Just resolved. This wasn't new. Years ago, when I was still new in the field, a CTO I trusted had asked me to share access for contingency. I did. 2 weeks later, I was locked out of my own build and handed a severance envelope in a conference room with no windows. Since then, I'd learned. I don't fight betrayal anymore. I prepare for it. Holden didn't think I noticed the shift. The way Ethan's tone changed. The way I was left out of critical updates. The way my systems were being mirrored. Just in case, they were rehearsing my exit. What they didn't know was that I had already written the final act. Now, sitting in my living room as Orion's timer ticked down beneath the calm glow of my second laptop, I thought back to that afternoon in the office, to Ethan's hesitant smile, to Holden's invisible hand behind it, and I felt nothing, not bitterness, not satisfaction, just confirmation. I reached for the same notebook again, now resting beside my mug. I flipped back to that page, T3, and under the last line, added a final note in careful script. They used it. It's done. The countdown on my screen read 6 minutes, 15 seconds. The trigger had already been pulled. Now all that remained was to let gravity do the rest. It was a Wednesday morning when I saw it. Quiet, unannounced, and devastating in its simplicity. I had just finished reviewing a minor patch to vSphere's node recovery protocol when the company-wide rollout deck landed in my inbox. Subject line, Q2 Strategic Deployment Overview, vSphere, sent to our largest aerospace clients. I opened the PDF automatically, half distracted, until I reached slide 6. There it was. System architecture, check. Diagrams I'd drawn by hand 6 months earlier, check. Timeline, dependencies, and deployment metrics, all mine. But my name, gone. Where it once said, Lead Architect, Trenna Hawley. It now read, Systems Oversight, Office of the COO. That office belonged to Holden. I sat back in my chair. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than usual. My coffee was untouched. I reached for the mouse again and flipped to slide 12. Same thing. No signature, no acknowledgement, not even a mention in the appendix. I didn't say anything. I didn't forward it to anyone. I just stared at the screen like I was trying to remember how to blink. It wasn't the first time something had gone missing. 2 weeks earlier, I'd noticed I was no longer included in the Thursday client syncs. The invites stopped coming. Then it was the internal briefs. I'd write a status summary, and someone else's name would appear at the top when it went public. Small things, easy to dismiss if you weren't watching carefully. But I was. This, removing my name from the deck, wasn't an oversight. It was a message. By noon, the twist came. A direct message appeared on my screen. Unexpected and painfully honest. Lenz Meissner, Munich. Just curious, why is your name no longer on the system specs? Lenz had been there since the prototype demo. He was the first to trust my build. The kind of client who read the logs himself. I stared at the message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "That's a good question," and hit send. The rest of the day passed in gray silence. No confrontations, no corrections. I didn't expect any. The next morning, I walked into the office earlier than usual. My badge still worked. My desk was untouched. No one else was in yet. I sat down slowly. The light from the window hit a small wooden frame on my desk. Inside was a stitched quote from my mother, one she had sewn for me during my first job in tech. Speak last, but move first. I reached for the frame and turned it over. The back was a little dusty. I wiped it clean with my sleeve. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and placed it inside. I didn't do it out of defeat. I did it because I knew what was coming next. Some people fight battles in boardrooms. I fight them in silence. Through systems only I can build and break. Holden wanted to erase me quietly, like a line of text on a whiteboard. But he didn't understand something fundamental. You can't erase the architect without compromising the structure. He could delete my name from the slides, but he couldn't delete the signature I embedded in the system's foundation. And he definitely couldn't decode what I wrote into the permission structure, because he never bothered to understand it in the first place. As I packed up for the day, I received a calendar invite. Demo day, Friday, 11:30 a.m. Boardroom A, from Holden. No subject, no explanation. But I already knew. He was going to take my work and pitch it to the investors as his own. Again. I didn't say a word. I just tapped my notebook, checked the timer, and noted that Orion had 5 minutes left before it entered irreversible lockdown mode. Then I turned off my screen and walked out. The email arrived at 2:13 p.m. I was reviewing a server authentication log, watching the minutes melt away on Orion's countdown, when the subject line appeared at the top of my inbox, like a crack in a wall I'd spent years reinforcing. Termination planning, draft V2.0. At first, I thought it was a misfiled system report. I clicked without hesitation, and then I saw the first line. Prepared for internal review, proposed offboarding timeline for Trena Hawley. I stopped breathing. My cursor hovered, trembling slightly above the next paragraph. The email was addressed to 3 internal HR contacts, plus me. A mistake, one someone would realize in minutes. But it was too late. I was already reading every word. There were talking points for the offboarding conversation, suggestions for reputation risk containment, a rough script for what to say if I became emotional, a proposed date for last day of system access, and a payout range, one that made me audibly scoff. They had already drafted a goodbye email, scheduled to be sent the following Monday. It even included a line thanking me for years of dedication to vSphere's early foundation, as if the foundation hadn't been my blood, my voice, my silence, as if what I had built was something they could simply narrate without me. I sat back in my chair. The lights felt too bright. My fingers dug into the edge of the desk. No apology, no hesitation. Just a timeline, a plan, a name, carved out of its legacy before the body had even gone cold. This wasn't just confirmation. This was choreography. I opened the draft again and reread the final line. This message will be sent upon board approval, scheduled for Friday. Friday, 11:30 a.m. The demo meeting Holden had just invited me to. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was replacing me in real time, while smiling across conference tables and nodding at hallway greetings. And HR was helping him sweep the floor behind his footsteps. I didn't respond. I didn't scream. The fury inside me had nowhere to go. So I opened my notebook, flipped to the page labeled Contingency, under the existing entries. I added a new one, in block letters, Received termination draft, accidental forward, logged. Then I copied the email, opened my personal inbox, and sent it to my lawyer. Subject line, Internal draft, unauthorized forward. No pleasantries, no need. I simply wrote, Add to fireproof folder. Then I clicked send. I remembered the last time something like this happened. A company in DC, different CEO, different title, same playbook. They gave me a bonus 1 week, fired me the next. But that time, I hadn't seen it coming. That time, I hadn't built Orion. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city carried on like nothing had changed, like the world didn't just reveal that it had been preparing for my exit behind my back. I leaned my forehead gently against the glass, eyes closed, let the heat of anger cool into resolve. Then I turned away, stepped back to my desk, and opened the Orion interface. The countdown continued. 4 minutes, 42 seconds. Soon. It wouldn't be a draft anymore. Soon. Their rehearsed removal would meet the real system they thought they could stage without me. They thought it would end with a quiet Zoom call, but I'd already started counting. When I was fired at 9:07 a.m., I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just glanced at the clock in the corner of my screen and whispered to myself, 14 minutes. Now. It was 9:21 a.m., and my silence was about to speak louder than any protest could. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, bathed in pale light from the window, the same cup of coffee still untouched beside me. The bitterness had long gone cold, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here to watch Orion breathe. It began slowly, like a long, deliberate exhale. First, the blinking lights on the system dashboard turned yellow, then red. One by one, node by node, region by region, the system was sealing itself, exactly as I designed it. Orion had never been just code. It was an autonomous, learning-based defense shell I'd built to protect what companies like theirs never really deserved: stability, resilience, and trust. And I'd written it to respond to betrayal the same way I had learned to: calmly, completely, without warning, no alarms, no flashing sirens, just one irreversible action. At 9:21 and 7 seconds. The central server room lost administrative access. The proxy gate cut outbound communication. Internal scripts attempting to bypass the system were rejected with a single line of text: invalid creator signature, system quarantined. I could almost hear the first wave of confusion ripple through their hallways. Some mid-level manager would call it, then the CTO, then Holden. Someone would shout, "Try the backup key," and rush to the file I knew they had, the one I gave them on purpose. But they wouldn't get in. I leaned back slightly, eyes resting on my laptop screen. The Orion interface had gone dark, replaced by a blank display, no code, no menus, just a blinking cursor and a single status line at the bottom. Encrypted, awaiting valid biometric reauthorization. It was quiet, satisfyingly quiet, and in that stillness, I felt it, not rage, not revenge, just return, equilibrium. They had erased me from their conference invites, removed my name from the system specs, replaced me on a client call without even informing me, as if I'd never mattered, as if I hadn't built the very core they now depended on. But Orion remembered. It remembered the 3 triggers I had silently placed in its logic kernel: revocation of architect permissions, unauthorized login attempt on the mirror server, use of the emergency override key without biometric confirmation. They had done all 3. They didn't know it. But the moment that fake override key was executed, Orion went into final lockdown, and from that point forward, there was no backdoor, no workaround, only me. I took a breath, steady and even. The last few weeks had tested every part of me: my patience, my pride, my principles. I had documented everything, built contingencies, watched patterns, and waited. Now, they would scramble. They would call it a malfunction, a bug, a security flaw, but deep down, they'd know the truth. This wasn't a bug. This was the system telling them, you don't get to rewrite history, not without consequences. My fingers brushed against the ceramic edge of the coffee cup, now cold to the touch. I brought it to my lips, took a slow sip, and let the silence settle around me. Holden would soon be yelling. Zachary would be sweating. Investors would be dialing in. And the system they had stolen would be asking, again and again, where is the creator? But they'd already fired her. At 9:07 a.m. And now, at 9:21 a.m., she had fired back, with nothing but silence, logic, and 14 minutes of restraint. I wasn't in the building anymore, but I didn't need to be. The panic started, as I had predicted. Exactly 20 seconds after 9:21 a.m., one of the engineers on the 3rd floor reportedly jumped up from his chair so fast he spilled coffee on the server backup logs. 2 levels up, I imagined the CTO, Zachary, frozen in place in front of the Orion dashboard. Holden probably stormed into the control room 5 seconds later. demanding answers no one could give him, across every terminal in the company's network. The same message blinked on a black screen. Creator signature not detected. System lockdown engaged. Their empire was built on Orion, and Orion remembered its architect. They scrambled. I knew they would. The moment access was revoked, they'd try the emergency override key, the one Holden's assistant asked me for 3 weeks earlier. I had handed it over with a polite smile, knowing exactly where it would lead them. Inside the encrypted system files, they found it. Master key Trena V1. It looked real. It passed the surface check. But it was a decoy, harmless on its own, useless when tested. I'd embedded a failsafe deep within Orion's core, programmed to detect forged credentials and counterfeit keys. When they used it, the screen returned a cold reply. Simulated key detected. Decoy activated. Only verified architect may decrypt system layers. Below that, in clean capital letters, my name appeared, Trena C. Hawley. The silence in the control room must have been suffocating. Holden, I'm sure, tried to keep calm, but his fury always had cracks, and this time, they split open fast. Are you saying she planned this? He barked at Zachary. Zachary, whose voice always softened under pressure, replied. She didn't hide it. She wrote the system. She warned us last year. Orion responds to its creator. Period. Holden's hands probably balled into fists. We own Orion. She built it under our license. Zachary turned pale. She didn't. Look at the legal header. It was built under her LLC before she joined. We just layered it onto our infrastructure. They tried to override me anyway. It was futile. Someone dug into the root archive and pulled a file marked architect.lock. Inside, they found a countdown and a message. This system responds to one voice, one touch, one mind. Unauthorized access will trigger data collapse in 41 seconds. They panicked. Voices rose, chairs scraped, fingers flew over keyboards, slamming in command after command. I could picture them, sweat rising on brows, trying to stay composed while investors started calling. 36 seconds. Email servers blinked red. External partners were locked out. Global clients, some of whom I'd personally onboarded, were calling in one after another. 29 seconds. Someone found a backup path. Tried it. Orion rejected the request instantly. Then, as if it had been waiting, every monitor across headquarters dimmed and relit with a single phrase. Authority expired. Below it, in bold font, this network is protected by biometric lock. Only the verified creator may reverse encryption. I'd embedded my own biometric chain in the root, voice signature, retinal matrix, and fingertip scan. The real key wasn't a file. It was me, and I was no longer there, in that moment. They realized what they had done. They erased my name from presentations, from internal credit sheets, from client demos. They shut me out quietly, with grins and passive emails. But Orion never forgot. At that exact second, 9:21 a.m., the countdown reached 0. The system sealed. The last green light on their dashboard blinked off. And in my apartment, far away from the chaos, I took a long sip of cold coffee and whispered, 14 minutes. Then I smiled. The phone rang at exactly 11:50 a.m. I didn't even flinch. I let it buzz twice on the desk, its name glowing like a ghost. Holden Vance. I picked it up on the third ring, my voice calm. Trena. He hesitated, just long enough to rehearse his smile. Trena, hey, I think maybe we started this day on the wrong note. I leaned back in my chair, the cold coffee untouched beside me. You don't say. We've been going through some technical difficulties over here, and I figured, you and I, well, we've always worked well together, haven't we? His tone had softened, dipped in artificial warmth. He was selling civility now, hoping I'd forget everything, being erased from the boardroom, the fake key, the contract draft marked termination plan. We were thinking, he continued, there might be a path forward, a consulting role, perhaps, temporary, highly compensated, just to help us stabilize things. I didn't answer, just watched the sunlight crawl across the floorboards like it had somewhere better to be. You'd be in control of your time. Of course. We'd draft up a fresh agreement, confidential, clean, and no hard feelings. No hard feelings. That phrase always felt like a rug being pulled slowly from under your feet. I let him speak, let the false peace build like steam under glass. We need you, Trenna. The system is delicate. The team's doing their best. But you built it. You understand it better than anyone. That part was true. I took a breath. Did you even read what you signed? Silence. I pushed my chair back and stood, letting my words fill the space between us. Page 97. He didn't respond, but I could hear the faint shuffle, paper, panic. You signed it. Holden. It's all legally binding. The HR draft you weren't supposed to send? Logged? The early morning access from your assistant's IP? Logged. The fake key? Archived. My handwritten journal entries? Scanned. Forwarded. Filed. I paused just long enough to let that sink in. To my attorney. A full 10 seconds passed before he tried again. Look, we don't have to escalate this. Help us resolve it, and we'll— This isn't about fixing your mess, I said flatly. It's about finishing what you started. He tried one last pitch, voice cracking. We can renegotiate, Trenna. Really. Just tell us what you want. I looked out the window. The city buzzed below, unaware of the chaos unraveling inside Brantech's servers. I want what's already mine, I said quietly. Then, with one last breath, I added, next time, try building something you actually understand. And I hung up. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then turned it over. Face down. No anger, no glee, just finality. I walked over to the console and tapped Orion's panel. Still locked, still uncracked, still mine. Then I stepped out onto the balcony, the light harsh and honest on my skin. For the first time in weeks, I felt weightless. Below me, the traffic moved, the world spun. The air smelled faintly of rain. Though no clouds hung in the sky, there would be more calls, more scrambling, more lawyers. But the call I'd been waiting for had already come, and I'd answered with everything he needed to know. Some systems break when you push them too far. Others, they were built for this. And I had built Orion for exactly this. I didn't need to raise my voice. The paperwork had already spoken for me, while Holden was busy pretending to negotiate and play the charming reconciler. I had moved quietly, efficiently, and with years of preparation behind every word. The moment I hung up that call, I opened the original employment contract, the one I had printed, highlighted, and tucked away years ago. Page 97. There it was, exactly as my father had insisted. Termination without 30-day notice voids all claims of ownership on software written by the employee. It read, simple, unmistakable, legal. I had forgotten how small my father's handwriting looked next to mine. He had drafted the clause with a mechanical pencil, circling each term as we discussed worst-case scenarios. That was back when I first accepted the offer from Holden's company, before Orion even existed. He was a lawyer, my father, not flashy, not loud, but precise. He believed in words the way I believed in code. Most people don't read contracts, he had told me. And the ones who do? They skip the end. He had smiled when I added that clause. He didn't say revenge. He said insurance. Now here we were, and that line, that quiet little sentence on page 97, had become the most valuable line of code I'd ever written. Holden didn't read it. Of course he didn't. He signed it during onboarding, distracted by some investor call. To him, I had just been a technical hire, useful, but replaceable. He had no idea he was authorizing his own legal checkmate. My lawyer confirmed it that morning, just after the system lockdown triggered. "It's enforceable," he said. "They didn't amend a thing. You still own the source code." My breath caught for a second. Not out of shock, but relief. Legal relief hits different. It doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like gravity returning to normal after weeks of imbalance. "They're in full meltdown mode," my lawyer added. "They found the clause this morning. Apparently, nobody knew it existed." Of course they didn't. Because no one ever wants to imagine the quiet woman in the back room, the one they forgot to invite to meetings, might be holding the blueprint to their entire operation. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. The light hit differently now. Outside, someone was trimming hedges. A delivery truck backed up across the street. Life moved on, while they scrambled to contain a fire they lit themselves. I picked up the framed quote from my mother I had tucked into my drawer days ago. "Speak last, but act first." I had always been the kind to act first, not out of spite, out of necessity. That was the difference between me and Holden. He played optics, I played structure, and structure doesn't blink. The company's legal team tried to claw back rights, but the documents were sealed, time-stamped, verified. Clause 14B. Subsection 6. Still active, still mine. I had kept every log, every backup, even a notarized copy of the contract in my home safe, laminated, no less. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I've seen what people do when they realize you built something they can't replicate. They pretend it was always theirs. Until the paperwork shows up. And this paperwork? It roared. By 2:42 p.m., Holden got the call from legal. I didn't need to hear the words. I could imagine his face, pale, stammering, blaming his assistant, then the lawyer, then probably the HR intern who clicked send on the wrong document. But the document wasn't the problem. The truth was, I didn't answer when he tried calling again. What was left to say, instead, I forwarded the original contract to our largest remaining investor. I highlighted page 97 and added one line beneath it. My terms are now active. Then I turned off my notifications and poured myself another cup of coffee. This wasn't revenge. This was return, of dignity, of authorship, of everything they tried to erase. They wanted to write me out of the story. Instead, they handed me the pen. I didn't expect the email to hit my inbox at 7:30 a.m. Not after everything. But there it was, sitting quietly under the subject line, "Emergency Board Meeting, Confidential Review Required." I wasn't supposed to see it. It was likely meant for Holden, or maybe for a senior advisor who hadn't realized I still had limited back-end access, granted through a clause they forgot to disable. But I read it. Every line. Holden was under investigation. His decision to fire me had triggered more than just a system lockdown. It triggered legal panic, investor unrest, and a thorough audit of every decision he'd made in the past 6 months. Apparently, firing the lead architect of a $880 million system without clearance or protocol wasn't just unethical, it was a financial torpedo. By 8:15 a.m., I knew the vote was happening. They were meeting behind frosted glass in Conference Room B, and Holden's chair, once positioned squarely at the head of the table, was now off to the side. No one was shouting. No one needed to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Orion had not just encrypted, they had exposed. The logs, the forged backups, the unauthorized access attempts. Every line of code pointed to one truth. Holden had tried to steal what wasn't his, and now the company was bleeding. At 8:50 a.m., I received another message. This one was more personal. "Would you consider returning to Havenbridge? As CTO?" It was from Lyle Branton, senior board member and someone who, despite years of silence, had always treated me with quiet respect. He offered no promises, no apologies, just a question. I didn't answer right away. I let the words breathe on the screen as I watched a new notification come through. Holden has been removed from his position effective immediately, it read, pending further review and legal proceedings. I stared at it for a moment. Not with triumph, not with revenge, just stillness. Then I reached for the small notebook in my drawer, the one I'd kept through the darkest parts of the Orion build. Inside the cover was a note from my mother. Act last, but act fully. I typed my reply to Lyle carefully. Only on one condition, I wrote. Every engineer, current or future, must have the same protection I had. Clause 97 will be standard. No retaliation, no secret firings, no power plays. And I want it in writing, no negotiation. A few minutes later, the cursor blinked under his response. Agreed. I closed my laptop slowly, pressing the lid down until it clicked. They could erase my name from documents. They could replace me in meetings. They could smile on Zoom while cutting my access behind the scenes. But they couldn't erase what I built, not without the architect's signature. And they couldn't bury the truth, because this time, I'd buried it for them. In code, in legal filings, in biometric locks they didn't understand. I walked to the window and looked down at the lot where Holden's reserved car space sat empty. His nameplate had already been removed from the door. The system didn't crash because I wanted it to. It crashed because they forgot I designed it to respond to betrayal. And the final signature they ignored, the one buried on page 97 of my original contract, was the one clause that flipped the entire boardroom upside down. I remembered writing that clause, sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, him in his worn-out Rutgers Law hoodie, talking through the risks of proprietary code. He pushed the legal pad toward me and said, "You protect yourself in ink, not emotion." Now, all these years later, his handwriting had become my shield, and the company that tried to gut me from the inside was now coming back, contract in hand, voice softer, face paler. It wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. At 9:05 a.m., I finally packed the last box from my apartment office. I didn't need to carry much, just my mug, the old project notebook, and the picture of Mom holding up my first tech award, framed with the words she once whispered, "They can steal your job, but never your value. Justice doesn't always look like gavel strikes or courtroom cheers. Sometimes, it's just an inbox message. Sometimes, it's a chair left empty in a meeting. And sometimes, it's the sound of your own breath, steady and quiet, knowing you didn't just win, you survived with your name intact. And that's the kind of legacy no system can encrypt. The doors still made the same soft hiss when they opened. Same lobby, same scent of cedar polish and recycled air. Same security desk, though the guard looked up at me this time, not past me. 2 weeks had passed. I stepped onto the elevator without swiping a badge. I didn't need one anymore. My biometric clearance was already active. The silence in the lift wasn't empty now. It was full of memory, weight, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Arrival. As the doors slid open on the 20th floor, I paused for just a breath. And then I walked forward. The hallway gleamed under the morning lights. I could still see the faint scuff on the floor near the server room where I'd once dropped a toolkit and bent to pick it up while holding back tears. Back then, I had to swallow my frustration and pretend it was nothing, but this time was different. At the end of the corridor, the sign beside the corner office had changed. CTO, Trenna Hawley, no parentheses, no acting title, no co-signers, just me. I opened the door to my new office. It wasn't the one I'd used before. They had cleared that out when they demoted me. This one was larger, warmer, with 2 floor-to-ceiling windows and a long table in the center. A soft breeze rolled in from a half-cracked window, brushing against the photo frame I now placed carefully on the desk. It was my mother's handwriting. Speak last, act first. I smiled. Then I turned on my screen. Orion's dashboard lit up. New design, new permissions. It didn't just protect me anymore. Now, every engineer had a personal lockout clause and anonymous reporting shield. A row of icons showed live health statuses for each deployment across 6 regions. I clicked the System Core panel. A line blinked across the bottom. No one steals what was built to defend its creator. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second. I could hear their voices from the board meeting playing in my head again. How Holden was quietly removed after the investors pulled out. How the internal audit team found the original clause on page 97. How the board had asked me, not just to return, but to rebuild. My terms were simple. I wanted protections for everyone, not just titles for the elite. And they agreed. A soft knock at the door broke the moment. Clara, one of the junior engineers, peeked her head in. Miss Holly? Yes? I just wanted to say, thanks for the new rollback features in Orion, and for adding our names to the contribution logs. Her voice wavered with something I recognized instantly. Validation. The kind I had chased in silence for years. You earned it, I replied gently. They just forgot to notice. She smiled and disappeared down the hall. I closed the door behind her and sat back. The coffee on my desk was still warm this time. My hand wrapped around it as the city hummed outside. Unaware that a woman once fired without warning was now the guardian of the very system they had tried to steal. I looked at the final screen, a message I had left in the metadata of Orion's root file. This time, they'll know who built the system. And they did. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, this story is for you. Trenna Hawley didn't seek revenge. She built protection for herself and for everyone like her. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and share your own story of rising after a fall. Don't forget to like, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every week. Your voice matters. Let's make sure it's heard.